Welcome to the Start Here podcast for web development. I'm Keith Monahan.
And I'm Dane Miller.
And we're here to show you how to build a career in web dev. You can find us online at starthere.fm. I was excited to kind of watch when Node.js became popular. Mm-hmm. And it was very intriguing to me to be able to, how quickly you could set up your own server and then how simple it was. But also, there's something very sexy about being able to write the same language on the server and the client.
Yeah. That was really appealing for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. What did you think about the type of community that the Node.js community or the type of people that they attracted at first?
So I didn't delve too much into the community, but it seemed to be a lot of the hacker type who liked to be like the bleeding edge, any other new thing.
Right, yeah. But even more so for some reason. Like sometimes you'll find communities like that, like Erlang has been a really hackery type community that's really extremely popular and, or the community around Erlang rather. And it's the same thing happened with Node. What's been really fun to watch with the Node stuff is you start to see a lot of third parties that really get their feet under them. So like you see a lot of templating engines kind of shine in Node, like Slim and some other JavaScript templating engines that just like, maybe they were around before Node, but they became popular, right?
Right.
And that's been cool to watch all those sort of peripheral libraries
coming together.
Yeah, exactly. You're literally watching a future very mature community. I'm not sure how mature it is yet, though.
So the thing that got me into looking at Node was Angular. Actually, doing
really? That's interesting.
Single page apps using Node on the server and then some connection deals. What is that one library for Node? It'll do the Ajax and it'll do the Socket.io. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Socket.io.
So the funny thing about that stack, if you had like Angular on the front end and then Node on the back end, is so much JavaScript. It's like it's more JavaScript than if you had Backbone in Node because Angular is it's a massive, it's just the way you code in it is so obtuse in my opinion that it's just like so much JavaScript.
Well, that's what I've been hearing, and so I never actually ended up building anything with Angular or Node or Socket.io for that matter. But as I've stayed in touch a little bit with the whole Angular movement, it definitely seems like there are people that love it, and then there are people that have said what you said, where it's difficult to write in, and it's more complex than other alternatives. Like Ember.js, is that one of the alternatives?
Yeah, like in the thick client front end world.
Yeah, like single page app type stuff.
Yeah, I think the big three are Backbone, Ember, and Angular. And go ahead.
Well, you worked with Backbone. I remember when we first started talking a while ago.
Yeah, I've worked on production apps in Backbone and Angular, but not in Ember.
Oh, you did work with Angular?
Briefly, yeah.
Okay. But I read some interesting things about Backbone, how it was, I don't remember. It had to have been 2 years ago when I heard it, but maybe it was complicated or I don't remember. But what was so obviously you've used Backbone quite a bit. How does it compare, so speaking only in feature set to Angular? Like, does it compare directly? Is it a direct correlation or what is it good for?
That's a tough question to ask because no, it's not a one-to-one mapping simply because Backbone allows for more customization, right? It's very much, Backbone is almost like a philosophy and they give you some functions to make that happen.
So that's what I remember hearing about it. It's very much like a do-it-yourself kind of process.
They have the underlying methods for you, right? But you kind of have to put them together yourself. But Angular very much has a strict pattern in a there's a lot of ways to do it and there's a lot of ways to skin it even following the strict pattern, but still it's a whole different type of app. It's a whole different type of framework, right? You have a very strict sort of behemoth type framework that you kind of if you code it correctly, it can be really performant because it's been tuned as long as you follow the map,
right?
It's like been tuned such that it can be really performant. And I've seen that in production. That's really cool. And Backbone, on the other side, Backbone can be really difficult because there's no like map. There is a light map, but there's no one way to do it. And because of that, it's hard to be as performant, but there's a lot of really intelligent people that have created a lot of third-party stuff that for Backbone that it's just great.
Interesting. So if you were to, with your little experience with Angular, right? If you were to recommend somebody who was relatively new to that space, would you say go with Angular or go with Backbone?
I would say you should exclude. It depends on the type of person, I think.
Okay. And maybe on the application they're trying to build?
Honestly, maybe not so much, really, because they're all going to do the same thing. Essentially, they're kind of all boiling down to the same sort of thing. One might be a little bit better for something than the other, but I'm not aware of what that might be. Mm-hmm. But I think it's based on like personality type a little bit. And then also, how much like customization you want to do. If you're the kind of person that just likes to basically build it yourself and sort of flesh out your own ideas and build out a pattern that you like, and you know what I mean? You have a lot of freedom.
So if you have more opinions about how something should be built, then maybe Backbone.
That's key. Yeah, Backbone for sure. Okay. You have a lot of opinions. That's a good way to put it. And then if you want to just follow the plan and really dive into like JavaScript and like really dive into some more complicated patterns, I would go Angular. I would say, especially if you're a new JavaScript developer, I'd probably go Angular, simply because you're going to learn a lot, a whole lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but I wouldn't learn Node.js and Angular at the same time, though. I would not try to build an app with Node.js and Angular at the same time, learning both of them. That's going to be a nightmare.
Okay, it's a good thing I never tried.
Right.
I was in the beginning there. I was like, "Oh, this is ideal. I should just do all of this at once."
Yeah.
And then it was just super easy to build stuff in PHP at the time, so just kept going with that. But I'm coming to a place where at my current job we are going to start building applications for smartphones. So Android and iOS and the web for clients, like specific use case applications. And I've been thinking at a very high level, like how I should do that.
What did you guys decide on? So here's the question. You have a certain amount of money that you want to spend to make each app. Mm-hmm. The problem is with Android, iOS, Windows Phone, these developers are the most expensive in the market. In their respective markets, maybe Windows Phone not so much because you have the whole C# community, which is a very expensive market. But other than that, they're the most expensive developers. So you're going to pay out a ton to get these apps made. So the question, like I'm sure you asked yourself and the CEO of the company you work for asked himself was, why not just have Keith do it in Titanium or Phonegap and, spend maybe like $1,000 more than we would normally pay him for a certain amount of work because it's so intense. But in the end, I think you'd save so much.
Yeah. So we had this discussion about, because there's no way that we're going to bring on Android and iOS developers at this time, at the size of our company right now.
You could manage it all remotely though.
But it's not really within what we can do. At this time, maybe in a year. Right. And so it was hard to think about that. So one thing that we considered was doing like a front end, single page app, something like with Angular, because then we could just roll that in, and then an API on the back end, right? And then roll that into Phonegap. Or I haven't heard of Titanium. Is that another competitor to Phonegap?
Yeah, there's a bunch. Some are like for enterprises, and some of them are for agencies and stuff. I've used Phonegap. I've never used Titanium, but
okay. I definitely heard of Phonegap.
That was interesting what you said though. Like building an Angular app powered by some kind of API that you build, and then sort of massaging that Angular app into Phonegap somehow. But the problem with that is Phonegap requires that you use like jQuery UI and a bunch of other stuff. So I don't know how you would.
Really?
Well, yeah, because okay. So I guess you have some choices. The thing is though, you need to do mobile routing and like some mobile specific things that jQuery mobile UI really helps with, and that's what we did when we did it. So I don't know how that would work exactly.
That is interesting. And so just to be clear, Phonegap and apparently Titanium, they take your primary, like your HTML kind of source code, and then boil it down into applications that you can install on other platforms, right? Like iOS and Android and stuff like that.
Yeah, correct.
Which is kind of cool because you can have one, like you could build for the web and then just package it. You can use Phonegap to just package it. And so that's a pretty...
Sounds pretty appealing, right?
Yeah. I mean, because I'm a web guy, right? I'm not a hardcore programmer like in Objective-C or Java or anything. I mean, I could do it, but it would be a whole other process.
Yeah. I mean, there's not really many cons, to be honest. I mean, if you're already a web guy, I mean, I don't know why I haven't done it with a bunch of my own sort of app ideas. You know, I think a lot of people will think that it's just web UIs, but that's not true. So the Phonegap doesn't create like web UIs. It can, but ideally what it's going to do is when you sort of generate your Xcode files and generate sort of your Android Eclipse folders or whatever the Java stuff they use that I don't care about. After you generate that, it's going to basically convert all of that like mobile specific HTML into actual real elements on the phone, right? So it's going to be a native app. It's totally native. As long as you code it correctly. I mean, there's a little bit of like a massaging situation where like if you code some crazy shit, it's not going to do that.
So what are the benefits of using Phonegap if you could just have your application be responsive and look like a native application, but run on the browser, right?
Yeah. So the benefits of Phonegap is it's a real application that you can send off and to the App Store. It's a real, literal application that exists on the App Store, and the same for Android, and not in the web. So like that's nice and everything that your website's mobile responsive, but I personally hate using mobile websites unless it's like specifically for something quick that I need to do or get, or I'm purposefully doing it. I hate when people are like, here's a mobile website. It's as good as an app. It's like, no, it's not. You just were like super lazy.
So what are some of the things, what are the downfalls of a mobile website compared to a mobile application? Like what is it that you don't like about that compared to the native experience?
Well, theoretically, one could create a mobile website that does everything that an app does, and they could both look pretty much the same, right? So what is the con of that? You know, if let's say that's the scenario, what is like the downside of the website version? It's like it's kind of personal preference. You know, they both do something.
I think a big part of it is 300 milliseconds, right? That's the time when you're using the web. Your phone, when you tap on something, your phone waits, I think it's 300 milliseconds before it responds because it's waiting to see if you're going to double tap.
Well, that for sure.
So it's not quite as snappy.
Yeah. So I think that's a big one. Like I kind of didn't really know how to word that, but that's a great way. So when you do any kind of button clicking on the web version, it's still going to load the page to get to the next one. On the app, that will all be loaded in memory just by the nature of the way that the iPhone and Android store, like, you know, kind of like pages in a way, but they aren't pages.
Maybe views.
Yeah, views, exactly. And then so, yeah, it's really interesting. And the apps are always much snappier. Even if they do the same animations, you know, the same methods, the same buttons, everything, it's just the app's going to be a better experience. And for me, the concept of a better experience, it sounds like, that's just like 10% better, but it's really like exponentially better. You know, it really changes the game when you have that sort of interaction.
And it is just that little bit faster. It feels more natural. Yeah. So one of the other things I've heard the difference is persistence, right? I know when I open up my browser again, it reloads the page.
Yeah, persistence.
And yeah, so you can have an application, like an installable application, and it will maintain your state, right? Unless you close it, it'll maintain the same state.
Totally. And I mean, we're building an iOS app right now, and, you know, we're saving state constantly, right? It's like Totally. I mean, we want to provide somebody the most seamless experience, and the type of app we're building, it's necessary that they open it and they land on the place they were at, right? It is very cool. And the state, that is a good point, I think. We basically just described, the differences between a mobile version of something and an app version. Now, that's nice and all, but like most businesses, when they decide this, do we make a mobile version or do we make an app? And even just like people like you and me, if we wanted to build an app, we have to make this decision of what is more financially viable, right? What is more financially responsible to do? And the unfortunate reality is most of the time it is the mobile website.
Right.
And well, I guess technically all the time, like you're never going to build a mobile website for more than you build a mobile application. I mean, unless...
Right. I mean, it's possible, but you wouldn't.
It's possible, yeah, but you wouldn't. And so I guess what would you say to that? Like, what is something that somebody could use to make a decision like that? If somebody does decide to invest the money on the app, is it really worth that extra investment?
Well, I think part of it has to do with features, because the client that we're working with, that we're kind of building a quote for right now, wants to do some things that you simply can't do in a browser.
What's an example?
So one of them is we want to pinpoint GPS, their exact coordinates at a specific time, and just log it with a particular record. But then we want them to be able to open up the camera and save pictures directly to one of those records as well. And I don't know, I guess maybe you can do some of that in the browser, but it is a way better experience in the app.
And they refuse to do like an app. I guess they're doing the same kind of justification, like, oh, it's cheaper.
Well, no, we're in the process of coming back to them with a proposal, and I think so. The decision we came to was not to hire out an iOS or Android developer, but instead we looked at an application, kind of a third party to Phonegap, I guess. It's called Appery.io. Are you familiar with that one?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay, so
what is this? Appery?
Appery.io. And it's essentially a graphic, like, drag and drop interface. And I hate that idea, like, from a developer standpoint, but it would enable us to build something pretty quickly and get it out there.
This is compelling in a way. I mean, they seem to have pretty big customers, AT&T, Samsung. Why would they have customers like that?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, okay, so they I think they specialize in that kind of enterprise application. You can use the site to build an application and then get the source code for the iOS and Android app stores. And then you don't have to continue having an account with Appery.io. But you can also use their service to create an API very, very easily.
Well, this is fantastic.
And so the benefit is, and so you would pay a monthly fee, and then they would maintain the API and the database for you. And I don't know, that's kind of appealing, because part of wanting to build an Angular app is great. I would love to get in and learn that, but at the same time, I'm going to have to build a server-side app as well at the API.
Yep. What I would say is, first of all, I just registered with Appery, and it is very cool. I've already started creating my first app. Yeah, I mean, I really like this type of idea. Like this, it's basically like, let's make this as simple as possible for people, and let's create the most complex possible outcome. It's like an API and a mobile app. Like, that's pretty non-trivial, and they just basically do it.
So we're looking into that, and it looks like a pretty good way to get the simple, right? So what we're our customers, we're probably going to stick with building mobile applications for our customers that are going to take some of their internal processes online. And a lot of that is, basic data entry type stuff and pretty simple stuff.
Well, before you get to that, can I just mention what you were saying earlier? You mentioned, you had to make a decision about going with, or you still have to make a decision about going with Appery or building it yourself. And so what I would say about that is, you're at a company where you're like one person that seems to be the web developer and the technical director kind of a role. And then there's obviously some designers, but it's a very small team. Now, take that and then think about 6 months from now. Say you have like a few mobile apps that you're managing, and then let's say you have like an API. Maybe you have like a couple APIs. Say you have a customer that wants a specific change request, and then you have all these different things that you're taking care of. That seems not scalable. So because it's just you, what I would do is I would totally go with what you were thinking. I think you were getting at that Appery would take that all away from you. Like, you don't have to deal with any of that.
Right.
And I totally agree.
It seems like it would be easier for where we're at now. I mean, it's very appealing, and it's almost sexy to just build your own native app from scratch, with Objective-C or Java. But
the sexiness does not outweigh like the amount of stress, and just to manage one system, the amount of stress that comes with that is pretty significant if that system is in production with any kind of load on it. Like, imagine doing that with multiple apps. Like, you would be, adding stat tracking, and then you'd have to like add stat tracking and generate the app for client 1 and then generate the app for client 2. But then you realize client 2's functionality is a little advanced. It doesn't interact with the stat tracking. So then the client 3rd, you have all these crazy things that you're trying to do. That would be a nightmare.
Right. And it's just not possible for where our company is at right now. Yeah. And I guess this brings up a bigger conversation about web development, because as it's become more complicated, there are tools now that allow you to do pretty complicated things in a simple way. It's almost like a different way to do web development for specific things. Okay. I don't know if you understand what I'm getting at here, but it's less about the actual programming and maybe more about fitting pieces together. Like building things with like graphic interfaces and things, and then understanding how applications are built. That's kind of what Appery.io does, right? You drag and drop, and then you connect things and you build it, right? And so maybe that's more of a user interface / I don't know. It encompasses a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I would say about that is I think if you step back a little bit from sort of how all these sort of apps are working nowadays, let's look at it from companies. So scope out on apps and you get the company that runs the app, right? So my thing is, if you zoom out on all the companies currently, you'll find that, they're all doing like really complex things, but the way that they're achieving success is by putting it all together in the right order. Like if you simply take technical infrastructure and you look at how different companies apply their patterns to that, they're basically just saying, we can increase here or there, but like we have an idea on how to connect things a little differently or do something a little, uniquely in the code or do that, and it's all about that connection. Like the load balancer does this before it hits the CDN that's connected to the blot, and it's like all this stuff, and everybody has their own way of doing it. And so, I mean, I think, I'm just validating sort of your statement. I think, having that sort of an application or mindset.
Right. What does that mean for somebody coming into web development? Do we want to, to say that as a web developer, you should be literally coding or programming all day? Or maybe if it's, if there's a tool that can get you to where you need to be, then maybe that's a good thing to do. I
think it's almost that what you just said is true, kind of. Maybe I agree with that, but also I agree that they should build it themselves to learn, right?
Yes.
But if there's this other thing where I think people shouldn't spend so much time coding, and I don't think they should spend so much time reading like textbooks on code. I think they should spend time trying to work with APIs and like trying to pull data in from Google Maps and export data out to this and like write things to CSV files and like download things from here and do interesting stat tracking and apply your that week's like code learning. I would apply that to this sort of API learning as well. And then you could do, code analysis on some kind of data set that you get from an API. And the point is, the reason you're doing this is because throughout this process, you're learning about contracts, like a that's a philosophical contract,
like a handshake.
Yeah, like a handshake. You're learning about like the more theory behind that, and you're learning about organizations, how other developers write their APIs, what kind of standards there are around and so you're learning about so much different peripheral things that I feel like it will allow you to have the clear big picture, and you won't get like so focused and ruined from like, oh, there's just so much code. It's too much. I can't do it. It's like, if you have that, and it feels good to like start pulling in data from another API, like that just feels cool, and you're going to feel good doing it. And so it's critical for a newbie, I think.
Yeah, it's got to be like, the same kind of feeling when you set up your first database, right? Your first CRUD application that can write and then retrieve information from a database. But, the world is changing in that there are so many applications and there's so much data. And it's really, it's almost become a game. And I think it has become a game of collating and displaying information that you don't necessarily own or control yourself, but that you're pulling from other areas. And I think people who are really good at connecting services are going to be the more successful people in the future. And
I mean, there's also another really interesting conversation on API preservation and the philosophical significance of the potential of API histories being created, and like the idea that like you can have an API that lasts forever somehow. There's a lot of like philosophical implications of that in the way that we write software, and how long we expect software to live, because almost everything connects with everything, and it will in the future. So this connection layer, this what you would call an API, it almost needs to be governed by principles and philosophical inquiry that is very based on morality in a way, because it's like, if this goes away, then the whole system falls apart.
Right.
And that's how it is now too. But I mean, it's like in data centers, it's not so much distributed.
This conversation about data and how you access data and display it is only going to be increasing, because for somebody to have not seen the writing on the wall that there's more data being collected, has to have been living in a shell or something, because the world is collecting so much more data and people want to use it. And I think there are tons of opportunities for people who can look at data, maybe stuff from completely different services, but combine them in a way that's exciting or new and different, and make a business out of it.
Yeah. I totally 100% agree with that sentiment. And I think you can look at it logically as well and say, why, for instance, here's my reasoning. I think there's going to be more web development jobs in the next 5 years than there's ever been. Some people would say that's ridiculous because it's in a bubble, and, let's say the tech bubble pops, then a bunch of jobs go away and stuff. The difference is the amount of data that we're inputting into the system, quote, is not going to change. It might a little bit, but it's not dramatically. And
it'll increase if anything.
It'll increase if anything. Exactly. And so therefore you need people that crunch, analyze, present that data, collate and present that data. And what a web developer is they're simply a data presenter, and you are going to exist for forever as long as there's not a tool that automatically does what you do. And that could be, I mean, there could be robots that do this in the next couple of years.
Yeah, but somebody's going to have to build those robots to do that.
Well, there already are a couple really awesome projects getting started to like auto create web apps from like business requirements. And so,
oh man,
that's going to put us all out of work.
Well, I want to mention one other podcast that I listen to quite a bit.
Yeah.
And they are proponents of this idea of, so they're proponents of building applications that run everywhere, and APIs as well. And I've learned a ton about APIs. And so API is just application programming interface, and it's just a way that you can send data between different programs. And it's fun. The podcast is called the Niche Podcast, NITCH.cc, and it's hosted by Jonathan Stark and Kelly Shaver. But they talk about this kind of stuff, and it's exciting to of hear their take.
Yeah, I'll definitely check that.
Kind of coming back around to Node.js, the way that the way that I would have used Node.js with Angular for an application like a single page app would have been to create an API. then connect it that way. But there's plenty of other ways you can create an API. Last episode we talked about PHP and Laravel, and Laravel has some pretty cool features that allow you to create APIs almost automatically as you build your controllers and your models.
And it's just a really quick, funny thought. Imagine in the future that all of these apps that people are building to automatically generate web apps are a success. Imagine they're a hit success. All these new companies are being created because people are building services automatically. Now, what does a web developer become? Does a web developer lose his job? Maybe, potentially a lot of them because they're idiots. What you would do to not lose your job is the same thing that woodworkers are doing now to not lose their jobs to machines.
Artisan,
exactly. You are an artisan developer and you are an artisan woodworker. I think I said woodmaker. That doesn't make sense. Woodworker. And it's the same concept, right? Like you will forever be in existence as long as this is an art platform, which it will be forever, potentially, as long as electricity exists, that, you will be there to present data on it, which is a cool thought.
There will always be people who don't want to go to Fred Meyer to buy a table, right? Or a grocery store to buy, or, a big department store to buy a dining room table, and they will go somewhere else.
Let's pretend all of the comfort money in the world went away, and nobody could spend spend money online. I don't know. This is a weird scenario, but I still think there would be a market for web developers in the art world. It's just like people. I've never had somebody come up to me when I was questioning web development and tell me this, like, hey, think about the future logically, really think through it. And you kind of arrive at that conclusion, or at least I do. And it's really amazing because it's.
So when an industry loses its utility, right? Its ability to actually produce.
Yeah.
Then
there's a nostalgia attached, and then also there's another almost like a sub utility that is called the art that then produces, right? So you can jump on to one of those worlds, I think, when or if the main utility of whatever it is that you were working for collapses. I don't know. That's a really weird way to put it.
Yeah. Well, I'm reminded. I just found an emulator for Nintendo, for Nintendo and Super Nintendo, and it's almost like that 8-bit, that 8-bit experience with the fun noise, sound effects and stuff. That has almost become an art now.
Yeah,
people build stuff and do art
with
that same style.
Yeah. Well, literally, they take the sounds from the Nintendo and make art, and it's become a huge thing called chiptunes. And that has become an industry in and of itself that has created and that would never have existed, perhaps not that exact thing if these types of consoles never were created.
Well, but then also because gaming has evolved way beyond that.
Yeah.
And it's been left in the dust, and you could say that kind of gaming is dead or dormant, right?
Yeah.
But it's revived in some ways because it's nostalgic. People
love it.
Remember that, yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny, you were totally right with the utility concept. It's the main utility of a Nintendo has lost. It's gone. The main utility of it was oh my God, this is possible in the moment of 1988 or whatever. It's this is, or not 95 or whatever. It's this is possible. But now that utility is gone because it's just a fun thing. So what's left is the nostalgia. And what you're seeing is a resurgence of, you have seen this for years, is a resurgence on the iOS and Android platforms of these pixel-based games. So you're sort of seeing people really emotionally connecting to that art style, and just expand that same cycle out and apply it to everything in the world because it's the exact same cycle, right? It comes in waves.
I wonder what that would look like, right? For web development, or maybe it's specific types of web development, like HTML or CSS, and mobile application development.
Sure.
If those things were as Nintendo are now, how would we think about and perceive that craft?
There's things that we can tie that to in our own world. So here's one. For instance, some things that we used to do when we first got on the web in GeoCities back in the day in like 95 or 6, me and you and like people in our generations, we were like, oh, this HTML is so amazing. Let's put these GIFs in our site of people shoveling and like fun things. And then those things, their main utility got lost. You know, their main utility at the time that they were created were to like tell you that the page was under construction with an animated GIF of a guy shoveling. It's like, that's the main utility, but we don't care anymore because we've moved beyond it. The main utility for us now is different. But there's been like a resurgence. This is a bad example. There's never been a resurgence of that specifically what I'm talking about, but I feel like you can find things. Here, help me out. Like, what is something in our industry that's resurged like that?
The example I have definitely hasn't resurged, but it's the rainbow colored marquee as it scrolls across the page.
Okay. See, I was going marquee too.
I love that.
There used to be the stupidest marquees in the history of the universe that every 14-year-old made on every GeoCities page. That
MySpace.
Said, yeah, and MySpace too.
Oh my gosh.
And they all said like, welcome to my site. Please sign my guest book. And
so great.
Yeah, and then but
I might add that to my site just because.
The funny thing is though, it's like I've never seen a resurgence of marquees. It's like never been a thing, but there is something in our industry like that. I'm sure.
Yeah, I can't think of anything, but I don't know. It's a fun concept to think about.
It is because you know it provides you a level of security in a way. I mean, you know, people don't zoom out, I feel like, in a way enough, you know, and if they did, they would see that the cycles come and go and that the security is basically always there. You just ride the cycles. Especially in an industry changing like this one.
Right. So as we talk about the end of the web development career, let's just be specific. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. Like anytime in the next, 20 years?
This is an interesting topic. So let's talk about like what happens if the bubble. So right now it's, you know, a lot of VCs and angels that used to say we weren't in a bubble are now saying we are in a bubble. It's pretty common knowledge that we're in a price bubble where, you know, we've been in one for a while where the, you know, the fluctuation in basically prices throughout the market is inconsistent or like not normal in a way. So you know, they're calling it a bubble. Now, the cool thing about this bubble is like, it's pretty much constricted to like rich people in Silicon Valley because the last bubble, it crashed the whole stock market. So what that did is normal people that were invested in the stock market lost everything. So like, that's a bad bubble and that you lose jobs in a bubble like that, right? Like, there's jobs lost every day in that. Now, with this potential bubble that we're in now around web and, you know, being a web developer, that might concern you. But, you know, say it does crash. Basically, what happens is all the people that invested in companies in the West Coast, in Silicon Valley and in New York and in Florida or wherever the hell else there's tech hubs, they all lose their money and they go down pretty significantly, probably not to zero because these are all really rich people to start with. And that's why it's not going to be a big deal. Now, it could potentially be
not a big deal for the economy,
not a big deal for the economy.
People will lose their jobs.
Potentially, some people could lose their jobs. Basically, what I mean by not a big deal is not like 2008.
Oh, yeah.
And as a web developer, I would not be concerned about losing your job if you're even 10% aware of what's happening, right?
There's an interesting correlation to the construction industry where I live because it was booming like in 2006, right?
Sure.
And everybody and their brother was a builder. They would build houses, right? Because the money was so good. And when the economy tanked, that all went away, almost all of it. And now as the economy's back up, the only people who are still in the market are people who do really good work. Yeah. And could weather out the storm, right? The people who are serious. And I think it's a similar situation with web developers is if you're just in here just to make a quick buck, that's the wrong approach. The better approach is to commit to it, to learn stuff, to be committed to learning the new technologies and being good at what you do.
Let's juxtapose exactly what you just said, right? So in the bubble, in the housing bubble, it was tied to a lot of different things that basically brought the entire stock market down. So what did that mean? That means banks can't lend money to build new houses. And so the building industry is one of the first industries to grind to a halt. So like that is very much intercorrelated to that. And as a web developer, you might feel as though you're intercorrelated to Silicon Valley, but you're not. Let's say the bubble crashes, a bunch of people in Silicon Valley, New York lose $10 million, $100 million, all these investors go down. What does that mean? That means that there might not be the same volume of work in the market, like as a web developer, but there's still going to be all those people from coast to coast that purchase websites and need shit done. And it's not going to affect any of the normal day-to-day people, but
right. I think you're right.
It could affect it'll definitely affect the volume. There'll be
it could affect the price because
it could affect the price.
Because if you have people who are in the tech bubbles, right, losing their jobs, those are the people who have the more experience potentially, right, who are at the top of the field. They would take the jobs that maybe you were looking for, and they would get them.
And you've got to ride the cycle, which kind of in this case corresponds to ride the market. You've got to ride the prices. You can't be the dick that's charging high prices when nobody else is. I mean, you have to understand that, like, if you're used to getting paid $160,000 a year and the market crashes a little bit, 10%, you've got to get used to now 10% less.
Dude, I would love 160 a year. That'd be awesome.
I don't know I would love that too.
Okay.
I don't know anybody that makes it right now.
Good. Okay, cool. So the one thing I wanted to mention is, like, the way I see web development going, and this has been said, I mean, you've probably heard the term the appification of everything.
Sure.
And that's not going away. That is still happening. And in fact, it's a very relevant discussion for the single page apps and building mobile and tablet applications, because there are, think of any small business that they have internal processes that, if put online into an application, their business would become more efficient. And so I think what we're going to see is just a surge of small businesses who can see that would help.
Yeah.
And who go and seek those applications. And they're nothing fancy. They're not games. They're really simple stuff, but it's there. And I think that's going to be huge.
So here's my concern with the appification of everything. I love the idea. I love the concept. I love what the outcome will be. And I love the result in our lives, which will be convenience. It'll basically make everything better. Now, the problem with that is what you're doing is you're so closely tying the economy to the state of technology. And what I mean by that is this. Let's say every small business in America was appified and they were all brought online, and most of their services were moved from like phone calls to some kind of online transaction. Like at first that sounds great, right? Now let's say the same bubble that we already talked about, that's not a big deal. Let's say that same bubble happens and it bursts. A bunch of hedge fund managers liquidate all their tech holdings. A bunch of people in New York and San Francisco lose maybe $10 million, $100 million or more. And then those people don't want to fund new businesses in the tech market for like at least a year probably. And then banks, because of how intercorrelated all this is in the market, banks don't want to lend to tech companies. And that could potentially have an effect where it brings all of these companies that are now online to a grinding halt, because the bank would say, okay, we're raising interest rates on you because you're a tech company. Technically, even though, you're kind of unrelated, but like your business relies on tech, your interest rates are going up, whatever. I don't know the situation, but it could be concerning. There is some kind of scenario there.
Yeah, that is interesting. And that very well could be. I was thinking more in the back end, not necessarily customer facing, but like in the back end, like inventory processing and like,
Well, that would grind to a halt as well.
Right? Well, I don't know, because I think you have business owners who see all the applications that they have on their phone and their tablet, and then they look at their processes inside their business and they think, oh, well, instead of writing this stuff down on a form or using Excel, maybe this would be better as an application that I can just use on my phone or a tablet, right? And so they're going to want applications that do that. And we're already getting requests for that, right? And I think that's going to be a huge industry. But the flip side of that is you're right, is that these same businesses are going to want installable applications for customers, for their customers, whatever the industry may be.
Totally. And if on a macro level, our conversation that we just had totally applies, and what you're saying totally applies, right? On a macro level, eventually they're going to need more technical resources. They're going to come more and more online, and they're going to appify more aspects of their business. Now, because that could potentially lead to some kind of macro disaster, I don't think that means you shouldn't do it. I think you personally and your company, if you want to appify a bunch of stuff and use it as services to then go sell to new clients and get those and make money, I think you should do it, because I think there will be a solution that comes along to solve this, just as there has been for everything. And so I'm just kind of having faith in that innovation cycle.
Like what kind of a service do you mean?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, I figured you guys were going to make a service or something around this like appification idea. And then you were going to take that and like pitch it to clients. And like, do you want this package or this package? We'll make an app and all this stuff.
That's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. No, I mean, mostly what I was thinking about is just custom applications that are tailored to the specific business, because some businesses look very different than other businesses.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, I think, the service probably would be like one mobile app, and then that's as broad, so that you can dive into the specifics of that service. Like maybe one package you get a mobile app and a website, and then another package you get kind of all three. People love packages.
Right. Well, and it's definitely a good way to market your services. And so one of the things we were thinking about is like maybe an upfront cost and probably a monthly deal, but then maybe offering to do updates, right? Updates to the application, like upgrades to new versions every quarter or something, as the business is looking and saying, oh, this would be a really cool feature to add. Instead of just adding those willy-nilly all over the place, we put them into a list, and then that becomes part of the next version of the application.
For sure.
So there's this support cycle that you get as well.
That's cool. I mean, I'm stoked for you guys. I think it's a really interesting place to go.
Yeah, I don't know, I think it's a trend. And if we're not seeing very much of it now, we will. We absolutely will.
For sure. I mean, I think it has been a trend. And just, for all the web developers out there that might be listening to this, I think you can totally get on board with that trend. Like I used to, when I did startup freelancing, I specialized in management-based solutions for startups like that need quick. That is exactly what we're talking about. It's like a business service that somebody offers that they want to bring online, and they want to make it a startup, and they want to do it like quick. As a freelancer, any web developers listening, that's literally a dream come true for a freelancer. You could not have a better market for freelancing. There could not possibly be a better market.
Well, and it's really untapped right now because everybody understands the usability, the use cases for a native application, and how fun it is to have it, your application always with you in your smartphone. It would not take much to go to some businesses, maybe people that that have businesses, and say, hey, have you ever thought about taking your internal processes and putting them in application? I'll tell you what, let me take a week and shadow your company, and I will find out what would be efficient, and then build an application for you. That's legit.
That's legit as hell. And here's the reason why I think it's such a good idea to build applications for other people instead of build your own. Yeah, it's like super rewarding to build your own and all that. You should definitely do that at one point in your life, but it's not as financially rewarding potentially 9 out of 10 times as you actually think. And one reason is there is such like an incredible amount of noise in the application world. And obviously we all know this. We've heard about this for years. There's so many applications, like 10 billion or something. Or 1 billion, whatever Apple announced at the latest keynote. So if you build your own application, you not only have to be very good technically, but you also have to be exceptional at marketing, or your application has to be so goddamn mind blowing that other people are just compelled to try it, right? So
share it.
And to share it. So what is the way to avoid that and sidestep that, but still make money? And that's to simply build other people's applications and let them worry about all that stuff. That's the hard part, the marketing and all that.
Well, we've been so focused, and Apple and Google they do this with all of their keynote, all their speeches and everything, is they showcase all of the applications on their app store that are for the general market typically. And we don't get to see what the market looks like for these kinds of applications that we're talking about for small businesses, because the user base for these applications is small. Maybe it's like 10 to 20 people.
I think that's exactly right. And that's why we don't see anything about it ever. Because the marketplaces for a small business application are that small business's customers. And usually it's maybe, I don't know, maybe they're global, maybe not, then it's not a small business. I mean, if it's a small business, it's a small amount of people.
Well, I mean internally, right? If we're talking about taking an internal process.
Oh, if we're talking about like internal processes,
then maybe
even
the
smaller.
Like between 5 to 50 people would ever use that application.
Yeah.
But
which is why you should automate as many processes as possible, because the amount of people, so the amount of like time to develop versus the amount of returned like saved time, whatever that ratio is, it's going to be way out of whack, especially if you're developing an app that like 5 people are going to be power users of, and it's like really complicated. I worked at a food delivery company in Chicago, and it was a startup, and we had this exact problem. Like, eventually one day, after developing this really complex back-end strategic like ordering and then logistics system for these girls to run and manage that they were already doing on the phone, we realized that basically the saved efficiency of them doing it on the computer versus the time that we were spending building it, which would have potentially been like over 6 months, that was way out of whack. Out of whack.
Well, but that's where something like Appri.io comes in, where
That's exactly.
Yep, where you don't have to code every piece of it.
Yep.
And it is, I mean, you have full control. It is drag and drop user interface. You can drag a button here, drag a list here, but then it's essentially it is HTML and CSS, and so you can go in and you can customize it to however you like. But it's a platform that if you were to learn something like that, like really, really learn it and know it, you could, if you had the right personality, you could go into a business and understand their processes, and that could be kind of the platform that you use to build from. So I don't know. I'm pretty excited about this market.
It's similar to what you just described. Is similar to people shilling Squarespace in a way. You're kind of like you're creating a business on top of another platform that makes it easier for you to perform the services that you offer, thereby making it more cost effective for you.
Well, that's our show for today. Thanks for listening. You can find the show notes at starthere.fm/webdev/11. And if you have some thoughts about building mobile applications or the future of web development, please go ahead and leave those in the comments, or you can email us. You can email me, Keith, at starthere.fm.
And I'm Dane at starthere.fm. And you can follow us on Twitter. I'm at twitter.com/_DAIN for Dane.
And I'm at Keith Mon, KEITHMON.
See you guys next week.
See ya. Bye. Dean, what is your beverage of choice this evening?
Well, I have a coffee that is cold that I'm not drinking.
Okay.
But it is the latest beverage that was in my hand, and it's 9:30 at night, and I had the coffee at like 7 because I have ridiculous amount of stuff to do. But the cup is notable. The cup says "Never stop hacking," which I agree with.
Oh, very nice. That's good.
What about you?
I'm enjoying a local brew. It's by 10 Barrel Brewing. It's called Pray for Snow. It's a winter ale, and it is a tasty. It is a tasty dark ale.
Oh, that sounds so much better in every possible way. It's even themed correctly.
It's a good beer. Now, the only downside to this particular brewery, 10 Barrel Brewing, is that
it's a little too walnutty. Is that the problem? It's a good problem to have.
No, it's. I think it's the second largest brewery in my town. It's a microbrewery, but it's one of the fastest in the country, fastest growing in the country. They just recently sold out to Anheuser-Busch.
Oh, sellouts.
Yeah.
The worst.
I know.
Now are we going to revolt? And you're clearly not going to finish that beer, right?
Well, I wasn't going. I was actually going to boycott them, but it was in the store, and I'm like, oh, that was such a tasty beer last year. And then I walked out the store with it. So maybe next time I'll pass up.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Next winter.